Welcome to Rubber Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome to the show Julian Schlossberg, who has done so many incredible things in show business, such as producing films in theater, hosting a radio show, and now a podcast. He has been a film lecturer. He was the vice president of worldwide acquisition at Paramount Pictures and the head film buyer for the Walter Reed organization. And of course, he is now an author. In 1978, Julian established Castle Hill Productions, a film production and distribution company. They distributed over 500 first-run and classic movies to theaters, pay TV, basic cable, home video, TV syndication, and other motion picture outlets worldwide. Julian established himself as a producer's representative for prominent figures such as Elia Kazan, Dustin Hoffman, John Cassavetes, George C. Scott, Elaine May, and Robert Duvall. And today we are discussing his two most recent memoirs, Try Not to Hold It Against Me, A Producer's Life, which was released in 2023, and my first book, Part 2, A Producer's Life Continues, which was released this year. Julian, welcome. Thanks again for doing this.
Thank you, Robert. I actually was getting tired listening. Sometimes I'm sure you've had this happen too. You think, wow, that's a lot of stuff.
That's a lot of stuff. Yeah. I was on your website last night looking at the biography, and you have done so many things and so many jobs in show business that I was like, I'll condense it as best I can while also highlighting the achievements.
And I think you did. I think you did very well. You know, it's funny. When I graduated college, most of my friends were professionals. They were doctors, lawyers, accountants, etc. And I realized that I was not going to have a degree because I wanted to be in show business. But what I did decide to do, Robert, was to learn every aspect I could of our business. And that's one of the reasons I had a record company as well, co-owner with Danny Goldberg, and, did my own television cable show with Woodmetco. I mean, there's so many other things. I wanted to learn every aspect of it because, as we both know, knowledge is power. And if you go into something and you understand it a bit, you might have a chance of being somewhat successful.
Right. Yeah. I think today we're in a position where more and more people are encouraged in show business to learn more than whether don't just be an actor, but also be, a screenwriter or a producer. And so I think that's a good, because as you said, it's such a challenging business. The more you can do, the better your odds are going to be at making a living in it. I would say.
Oh, I totally think that's true. And it's one of the reasons that actors recognize that they're only as good as who's calling them. They better start looking for projects themselves, because if they don't, they may be sitting by the phone for a long while. And that's why so many of them have become producers or executive producers. And I think it's very smart. You don't want to be that beholden if you can.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, the first thing I wanted to ask, which is a very, common question, is you wrote these two books. What inspired you to want to tell all these stories from your life?
Robert, I'm sure you've had this happen as well. You're with friends or maybe new friends, and you'll tell a story or two, and you'll get the famous sentence, you ought to write a book. You ought to write a book. And I say, yeah, and had no intentions of ever writing a book. But then COVID decided to come in and change my way of thinking. In almost every country in the world, whatever the language is, there's a saying that says, man plans and God laughs. And I think that's exactly what happened. I had no intentions of writing a book, let alone a second book, but I was not stuck, but I was in my home, and I thought, well, I'll write a story or two and see if my wife doesn't fall asleep listening. And so she did, and I kept going.
Well, I'm glad you did, and I chose to listen to them because I always prefer to read a book, but I find memoirs to be great audiobooks because I feel like I'm with you and you're telling me, these stories. And it's funny. It's odd that I'm only talking to you now, but I feel like I've spent the last month talking to you while I've been washing the dishes or walking and listening.
Well, you have my deepest sympathies.
No, I really enjoyed it. And one thing, I would imagine even a lot of, film buffs maybe wouldn't know a lot about what film buyers do. And, you were doing it since the 60s and 70s. And can you talk a little bit about what a film buyer does and how it has changed with cable and DVDs over the years?
So radically, Robert. But what we did was that the whole business was different. You didn't open 1,000 prints or 1,000 theaters or 2,000 and take national ads, etc. You opened New York and LA, and you opened slowly, and you wanted to see it really set the pace for what that film distribution would be, not just in the East Coast or the West Coast, not just the country, but the world. Because you really wanted to see how the critics responded, how the audience responded, and it went that way. And the company I was with was a powerhouse in New York City, the Walter Reed Organization, because they had theaters on both the West Side and the East Side. No one did that. Our prime competitor was Don Rugoff Cinema 5, but they only had East Side theaters. And then the other competitor was Lowe's, but they only had one West Side theater. We had on the West Side the Astor, the Victoria, the DeMille, and the Ziegfeld, and on the East Side the Coronet Baronet Fine Arts Festival, Little Carnegie, 34th Street East. The idea was you could open day and date, as they called it. So let's take a movie like The Great White Hope with James Earl Jones. We opened on Broadway for an action crowd. We opened on the East Side for a more sophisticated crowd. And that's how it went. Film buying was that because I was in a power position, I never got confused that it was about me. I always knew it was about those theaters. And the fact that I was getting literally 100 calls a day and being offered all kinds of perks had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the seat that I was sitting in. And so there was no confusion on my part. It never, quote, went to my head. And I was only 27 when I was doing it. Film buying at that point, because you asked that question when we both were much younger, but film buying at that point was the fact that you would be offered film. Sometimes you could see them, but sometimes you couldn't. I always requested then I had to read the script or at least see 20 or 30 minutes of a movie. And even with that, even seeing sometimes 20, 30 minutes of a movie, I made mistakes because you learn that even 20 or 25 or even 30 minutes does not make a movie. Gives you an idea, but it doesn't make it. And so the idea would be that because we were first run and we were launching movies, we were offered all these movies ahead of time. And that's what film buying meant. But I also was in Boston and Washington and Chicago and San Francisco and LA and Portland and Seattle. We were all over the country. So that also, I would say I'll take New York and let's say Dayton, Ohio for this particular movie. Or I would try to get other cities. And it was a very competitive and very interesting time. And I really loved it. I loved what I was doing.
And from doing that to then producing to lecturing to producing on the stage, all these things you've done, how did you learn to do all these things? I mean, is it really trial and error and just working in the business? I mean, it's not like there's a long-term courses for these things, or maybe there is now, but
there were, at that time there weren't even short-term courses.
Right.
That's a good question, Robert. Let's see. Well, theater, I had no intent. I loved theater. In fact, I love it the most. But I had no intentions of going into theater. I was a film guy, and that's what I did. And I couldn't believe that two wonderful, talented people, Renee Taylor and Joseph Bologna, came on my radio show in New York. I had a radio show on WMCA, and at the end of the show, we had hit it off well, and they said, "We have a new play. Would you like to hear it?" I said, "Well, I'd like to hear it, but I don't produce theater." They said, "Okay, well, come on over and to our home and listen to it." I said, "Well, my mother's in town. Can I bring my mother?" And they said, "Fine." And Joe said, "Do you mind if I bring my mother?" I said, "No, I don't care." So the audience were myself and two mothers. And at the end of the play, it was so funny. I was so taken by it. And what I really got excited about was an Italian mother and a Jewish mother were really enjoying this play besides me. I figured, well, if that's the case, okay, maybe. But I said to Renee and Joe, look, I've told you I've never produced a play. And Renee said, so you'll learn with us. And that's how it started. That's how it began.
Oh, God. Yeah. You told that was a story in the book as well that you told, one of many. I'm curious, as we talked at the top, and I think even the general public know how hard show business is to break into, no matter which way which angle you look at it, or actor, director, writer. Were there times where you were really struggling and just thought, I'm going to go and do something else?
Oh, no. There was never one moment did I feel that way. But I will tell you what I've done over 60 productions that I produced for theater, film, and television. And I don't think there's ever been one that at one point I didn't say, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Because something has gone awry, because something always goes awry. And so that's the only thing. But no, I never, ever wanted to do anything else but that. And that's what I did. I mean, I majored in history, and I guess I could have been a history teacher, perhaps, but I never thought of anything but show business. From a child, I was a little kid. So.
And another thing that really appealed to me about what you've done is you started this. You had your own radio show for many years, and now you're doing that as a podcast and YouTube channel, which is Movie Talk, which is fantastic. How did you develop your own interview style?
Wow. You ask very penetrating questions. I wish I had penetrating answers. I think, Robert, I can say that I'm interested. That right. It's not artifice. I'm really interested in who I'm talking to, or I wouldn't invite them on the show. And so every once in a while, you get a clinker. You say, oh, boy, you may have been interested, Julian, but you really made a mistake. But by and large, I would say 90%, I've been very happy with the people that either I chose or chose to come on the show. As far as the style is concerned, I think what you and I are doing is the style I always want to do. I don't want to feel it's an interview. I want to feel it's a conversation. If I can do that, then I've done my job. But I never thought of it as a style. The only style that I did do, or at least a technique that I did, I was interested in where they came from, not where they were only. But where did it come from? What manifested it? How come you decided to do this, etc.? And that was interesting to me to see the background. And many backgrounds of very, very many famous people are rather sad. There's been a lot of turmoil and a lot of sadness. So it's interesting that many of them chose to get out of that vortex, I guess, and try to make a happier life for themselves.
Well, I listen to some of the episodes, and it's always such a compliment when people, like, I know even Ben Mankiewicz, I noticed, said to you know, how do you know these things about me? And so it's clear that you do so much research, which people helps people open up. But you're right, they did feel very conversational, like two people just meeting at a coffee shop. And but the Woody Allen one as well. I mean, they're, just for the audience, I'll just mention some of the guests you've had. So yeah, Woody Allen, Eddie Muller, Ben Mankiewicz, F. Murray Abraham, Richard Benjamin, Matthew Broderick, Alan Alda, That's just to name a few. Did you have to pull anyone's arm to do it, or did people?
Oh, I spend a lot of time groveling and sniveling along. Yeah, sure. But many of the folks I've known for years, or I've worked with, or I've produced for, or I've partied with, or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, you don't get everybody you want. That's always the case. But by and large, I've been very fortunate to be able to get who I want to get on the air. Yeah.
Did Woody say yes right away, or was he a harder?
I don't think Woody says yes right away to anything like
Oh,
this.
okay. Well, fair enough.
but I pretty much produced all his plays. So
Right.
we've spent enough time together to know that I know a little bit about the business, and that I'm going to talk professionally and not worry about anything beyond that. Yeah. And but he was extremely forthcoming, and I was very happy. And at the end, I asked if he'd do another one, and he said he would. And so we'll try to schedule another second one. I was very surprised to see how I felt relaxed he became, and that was I was very pleased about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed you had some great comments too. Some people saying it was the best interview they'd seen with Woody, and really fantastic stuff. I like I said, I really quite enjoyed it as well. So
yes, well, I was telling you before we went on the air that I'm going to plug Buddies, your early film that you did. But it's right on the web, and check out Robert. He's a hell of an actor. He can really let loose. Okay.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was a film. Yeah, I did when I lived in England that I always wanted to have a home for. So I thought, well, I have my own YouTube channel, so I'll put it there.
That's exactly the place to put it.
Yeah. Well, thank
you. I really when I say enjoyed it, I enjoyed watching you act. It's a little bit down and dirty there.
Oh, yeah. It's a rough film. It's a dark film.
But I like the title.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Buddies,
well, thank you again for watching it.
Oh, yes.
I know you talked in your memoir about you dabbled a little bit in acting, and it was just from listening to your audiobook. You had also been a lecturer. You are very sort of not even sort of, but very warm and charming and kind. I imagine those personality traits must have been a big help to you, producing and selling and working in sales over the years. I mean, if you agree that you have those traits, I mean, did you think that those traits helped?
Even if I didn't agree, I would agree. No, you know what it is? It's true. But it's a very rough business, as you know. And I fired a very famous actress once. But before I did, we were having dinner, trying to work out the problems that we were having. And I said, you're making a big mistake. Yeah, what is it? I said, the big mistake is you're mistaking my kindness for weakness. I said, I can wipe the floor up with you if I want. I choose to take the high road. But I've been down there. I know what it's like. So don't mistake it. And she did. And I fired her. So,
Oh, God.
So it didn't help my saying that you're mistaking my kindness for weakness. So
I see.
I don't like firing people. I've only fired 3.
Oh, wow. And I guess you don't want to say who.
No, I don't. But in the book,
of course,
in try not to hold it against me, I do say who it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That must have maybe went over my head. I'll have to go back.
Watching you, I don't think too much is going over your head, my man.
Hey, well, there's always something.
I guess that's right. There is always something.
There is always something. That's one reason why I always think I like listening to the memoirs, but when you read a book, things really sort of sink. Whereas if you're listening to something, you maybe also on a walk or, doing an errand. But again, I encourage people to also listen to it because you're really hearing Julian tell his story. But you talk. I'm wearing my Elaine May shirt, who's one of my favorite filmmakers and writers, and you are both very good friends. And she comes up a lot in your books. And she wrote the introductions to both books, which are very, very witty. You tell this great story about how she initially got angry at you over the advertisement for Mikey and Nicky, which she directed when you were at Paramount, and Paramount produced it. And she had said, make sure my name isn't on it, the ads, because I don't want people to think this is a comedy, which of course Elaine May was known for, and Mikey and Nicky is not. It has humor, but it is not a comedy. And she got angry with you after seeing that her name was on those ads. I was curious, how did you patch things up with her after that?
Well, again, I've used the word groveling earlier, but what had really happened was it was not in the ad per se for opening the movie. It was for a sneak preview. It was a sneak preview, and she didn't want her name in that because Peter Falk, John Cassavetes, Ned Beatty, she didn't. If it said written and directed by Elaine May, the audience would really think it's a comedy. After all, she was coming off this gigantic Nichols and May comedy team, and then 2 comedies, A New Leaf and Heartbreak Kid. So she was thought of totally as a comic person. And I was overruled by the president of the studio, who said, I said, look, she doesn't want her name. They said, no, the name's going in. And so she got angry, and I'll give him this. He said, I overruled him in front of her. He said, I overruled him. And then what happened was we were going to open the movie, and because they were going to open in many of the theaters I used to be involved with at Walter Reed, I went around with Elaine to make sure that the trailer, Coming Attractions, was up on the screen on all the Walter Reed theaters, and it was not. And I made sure that it was, and I think through that, I got myself back into her good graces, because I felt terrible about it. I really did. That was one of the worst nights of my life.
Oh, God. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Because I never do anything. I had such admiration from her, for her from afar. But I'll tell you, Robert, the very first conversation I had with her, my assistant said, Elaine May's on the phone. I said, Elaine May's calling me? I couldn't believe what it was about. I said, hello. And she said, Warren Beatty told me you're okay for a studio executive. Clearly, the bar was not too high for the studio executive. And that was her opening line to me. Yeah. And since that time, I've again produced all her plays and work with her all the time. She is just a force of nature.
Well, she recently, I know before we started recording, we touched on this, but she recently went on Turner Classic Movies, and you interviewed her there. And she is such a private person. I don't think she's been interviewed since the 60s, I heard. I could be wrong about that. How did they get her to do that? And how did you then go get involved with that?
Well, let's go the other way. They didn't get her. They got me, and I got her.
Oh, okay. So you talked her into it.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's not an easy thing, because I call her the Greta Garbo of our time. She just wants to be alone, and Elaine is the only person I ever met in show business. Only person that paid a publicist years ago to keep her name out of the paper. So whatever her reasons are, she didn't want to do it. But I felt very strongly that her work should be on Turner Classic Movies, and the people, and I love TCM. It's my favorite.
Oh, me too,
by far. And Bob Osborne, who was before Ben Mankiewicz, was a semi-regular on my radio show before he was on TCM. He was writing for the Hollywood Reporter, and so I was and I know all the people there, and so I was happy to try to facilitate it, and we did. And she was so terrific. Like Woody, she was very forthcoming, and I was very pleased, because as you know, Robert, even in our interview, no, you heard my memoir, but a lot of times you get someone on, you don't know what you're going to get. as you know.
Right. Right.
You only
Of
hope,
course.
you only hope
Of course.
you're not going to fall asleep listening.
Well, I'm glad that you did that, because I think she's such an incredible filmmaker. And like I said, I mean, Mikey and Nicky and Heartbreak Kid are two of the greatest, at least in American films ever. I mean, I can watch them over and over again. I mean, I absolutely love both of those films. And what I was curious if maybe you don't want to say this out of respect to Elaine, but why has she been so private? Has she ever mentioned why she doesn't like to be in the press? Or I don't know if that's something
she has to me. She's not comfortable. She
Right.
finds it's a lot of artifice, and she's a very truthful person and a shy person. So
Mm,
it just, and she doesn't really feel she needs it, and she doesn't. I mean, people
right.
come to her today all the time to do a rewrite, to star in something. Literally this week, she turned down two roles in a movie that they wanted her for.
Wow.
So she
Yeah.
doesn't have to do it, and doesn't not comfortable doing it. So as she said, why would I do it? You know?
Right.
So
Well, good for her, because I'm sure a lot of people feel that they have to do it
they
in
do.
order to.
They do.
Yeah, and you do.
And she feels she has not to do it if she can
Right.
try not to, which she has been successful in turning down. So yes, I'm always excited when I can get her to do an interview. We did the 92nd Street Y in New York, and she came out with me,
Yeah.
and it opened this way. She said, "I told him," pointing to me, "that I can't do an interview. I don't do it. I don't like it. I'm not comfortable." She said, "So don't expect to have a good time."
So blunt. I love it.
That's how she opened.
Perfect way to put it. I'm sure
Yeah.
everybody laughed when she said
Oh
that.
my God. They were
Yeah.
standing on their heads because she doesn't appear in public. So
Right.
they turned hundreds of people away that night. And
Right.
it was all she did it for me to launch my first book.
Oh,
So,
I see.
and then the second book, she came to Sardi's, and we did it there. So she's been, as I said to her, she said, "Don't make me do this anymore." I said, "Elaine, you gave it the office."
Well, there's I don't know, there's a biography out on her now. Did you happen to read it?
I did. Of course, I've read all of. There's been more than one. Yeah, I have. Not more than one on her only, but she's mentioned in Mike Nichols too. Yes, I have, and she steadfastly does not get interviewed. So
Right.
yeah,
Right. I imagine she wasn't thrilled that there was an entire book on her.
it's so funny, Robert. That's an interesting point. I don't really. She's so different from almost anybody I've ever. In fact, she is different from anyone I ever met. So I don't think that was her concern. I just don't think it bothered her one way or the other. I think if she said she had a choice, she'd say, "Don't do it." that
Right.
certainly. But no, I don't think it mattered. I don't think so.
Well, I really enjoyed the film you produced with her called In the Spirit.
Oh yes,
with Peter Falk is also in it, and the chemistry between her and Marlo Thomas was fantastic. I mean, they were really, really, really funny.
Well, they're real good friends in
you
life,
can feel
as
it.
they say. And as I wrote in the book, I was an only child, but as an adult, I got two sisters, and it was Elaine and Marlo. So
Right.
And in the second book, Marlo writes a whole chapter
Yes.
on working with me and her dad, Danny Thomas.
Yes, I love that you got them to read those letters in the audio books, which
Yes.
I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, those are the things you try to do as a producer, to say, well, how can I make this a little different than most books? And it was nice to have her read it, Renee Taylor to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. But it's an interesting thing. You never know in the business what's going to happen, where you're going to go. And most people will say that they never had a plan. There are some people, I'm sure, who do. I'm sure Madonna, for example, knew what she was going to do. She was going to do it. But very few people in show business they just kind of, it's not that you go along drifting, but you kind of just want to work and do good quality work if you can.
Right.
Frank
Right.
Gilroy won the Pulitzer for the play. The subject was roses in the movie. And he once said to me, "I know your tombstone." I said, "What? I'm a young guy." He said, but I'll tell you what it'll be. It'll say, "Quality was his undoing."
Oh, quite ironic.
Yeah.
Way to put it.
It was kind of a bit of a backhanded compliment. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, you get
That's
those
funny.
in life often. I remember after Try Not to Hold It Against Me, I'm happy to say I got wonderful reviews. I did. Okay. But here's the funny part of it all. Almost every reviewer said the best part of this book is that he wrote short chapters.
Oh,
Now, I thought, well,
That's
wait a
interesting.
second. How about my writing style? How about my quality? No. He writes short chapters. We love that. I thought,
that's such a strange,
Yeah.
another backhanded compliment.
Yeah, I thought so. I really did.
That's odd. I wonder if that has anything to do with people being so used to images more often nowadays, and I mean you and I both have podcasts, but listening more as opposed to reading, and so there's some maybe being lost there a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah.
I like the good part of it, but it is. We were talking earlier about the vicissitudes of our business. There's a wonderful story about the great director Fred Zinnemann, who, as you know, directed High Noon, Man for All Seasons, From Here to Eternity, one of the great directors. And he was taking a meeting with a vice president of a studio. And the studio executive said to him, "Oh, Mr. Zinnemann, it's nice to meet you. Tell me, what have you done?" And Fred Zinnemann said, "You first."
I love that. That was also in another great story in the book.
Yes, that is
that
from the
you
book.
mentioned.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
No, I love that. I think I mentioned to you through email that John Cassavetes is one of my favorite filmmakers, and you represented his films Shadows, A Woman Under the Influence, Opening Night, and Faces, of course. And you have a great story about him, which I won't spoil here. But if again, read the book or listen to the audio version. But were you a close friend of his, or was it more of a business
I
relationship?
think more of a business relationship. I cared for him a lot. And because he always stayed at the Wyndham Hotel in Manhattan, and my office was the next building. So he always visited because it was so convenient. But we socialized a bit. And the word friends is thrown around so, as you know, so loosely.
Yeah.
And the other word that everyone's an artist. Everyone these days is an artist. There are very few. Elaine May is an artist. Woody Allen's an artist. John Cassavetes. There aren't that many artists. There just aren't. And so I would say that I would like to say that we were certainly friendly, and but our relationship was centered around his movies. Yes.
Did you know Gena? Did you know his wife?
I did know Gena, who I think it gives one of the greatest performances I've ever seen on film in A Woman Under the Influence.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's absolutely extraordinary. And having spent time in college at some institutions with mental patients, she got it down to the absolute. I mean, it was the rawest, most incredible performance I've seen on film.
I agree.
Yeah. So of course we had that in common. I told her how much I loved it every time I saw her.
Well, it's interesting because John often said they didn't even consider anything about the fact that the character may have had some kind of a mental illness. And it's interesting how people have interpreted, and it's totally valid to look at that because it's certainly plausible that she did. I actually last week here in Toronto, there's a repertory cinema and they showed it, and it was the first. I've seen it many times, but I'd never seen it on the big screen, and it was sold out. And just to hear the people respond to it, and you could tell some of them were seeing it for the first time. And I always get emotional in it, but seeing it on the big screen, I was getting even more emotional in some of those moments. But I took my wife, who hadn't seen it, and afterwards I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "I wasn't crazy about it." Just like, I was like, "You got to see it again." It's, his films are hard to take the first time, I think,
Yeah, John wanted to challenge an audience. John,
yeah, exactly,
was not to make it nice. That he wanted to show the difficulty of relationships and what happens in a society where pressures get so much that someone almost cracks, and
right.
and she pretty much played a bipolar woman, I felt, anyhow.
Right. Yeah.
But John was unique, and I valued the years I spent with him, and I respected him greatly, because he made the movies he wanted to make, and he and Gena literally, at times specifically, would mortgage their house to be able to make his own movies the way he wanted to make them. So
he did tremendous courage to do that, and guts. My God.
Yeah, it's true. He
one of a kind.
But he and it was to have to see John, Elaine, and Peter Falk together I didn't know where to look first.
I would love to be in a room with the four of them, if only.
That's right. That's right.
I just wanted to actually circle back to Elaine May, because one thing that you mentioned was that she actually has been offered a lot of films to direct that she's turned down, which is interesting to me, because I think a lot of people think that because of the issues she had with Paramount and, with things like Ishtar, that, there's a double standard because she's a woman, that they wouldn't even give her another opportunity. Whereas, if a man goes over budget, they can still go on to work and make a lot of films. But is that maybe perhaps that isn't the case, because you said that she did get a lot of offers that she wasn't interested. Is that kind of the way things went for her?
I think that there was, and probably still is, a double standard.
Yeah.
And that had anybody done that. But here's the irony of it, and this never comes out in public, so you're going to be able to broadcast it.
Oh, perfect.
When Coca-Cola owned Columbia and the movie was made, they had a deal with HBO, who would put up 40% of the budget. So 40% of the budget of Ishtar, right off the bat, was covered. Then after that, the film did very well in certain countries around the world. And I would never be shocked to tell you that I wouldn't be surprised in a year or two that the film breaks even. So this huge flop was not a flop at all. And whether it was the New York Times, the LA Times, this is easily looked up. It got some very good reviews. But it had a very strange thing happening. And this is a very common thing in the studio system. A man who's the president gives the okay, greens light it, a movie. And then a few months later, whatever the reason, he's fired. And a new guy comes in. Well, the new guy has no interest in that old guy's movie being successful.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. Guy McElwain had okayed it at Columbia. Old David Putnam came in. David Putnam leaked the budget. Nobody in the history of a studio leaks the budget. That's the last thing you want to do. And all of a sudden, the budget got put out of proportion to what the movie was. And on top of all of that, it turned out that you find out that the internecine politics that could go on sometimes have absolutely nothing to do with the movie, but a lot to do with ego and perpetuating power. David Putnam had a terrible experience with Dustin on Agatha. He was the producer, and
right.
Dustin was in it, and they did not get along, and Dustin banned him from the set. So he was the co-star. Warren and he were up against each other on Reds versus Chariots of Fire, and they didn't get along well. So now
I didn't know that.
Yeah, David's now in a position. It's not his movie, it's his company's movie, but he didn't okay it. And he's come in saying that Hollywood makes budgets that are absolutely out of control, and there's no way of doing it. And here's a prime example of it, his own movie. So it was a very strange and interesting time. David made some terrific movies, and it was, I think, a terrific producer. But he was, as I said to him at a dinner, you saying that Hollywood is the worst in what they do, don't say it now. Prove it, and then say it. But he went in that way, and he went in that way, and he got out. They threw him out pretty fast. So,
oh God,
Ishtar was caught in that, and it depends. In Canada, there are two guys who made a documentary called, I think, either Waiting for Ishtar or Looking for Ishtar. It's an interesting documentary. They went around the country of Canada and found that in the libraries, there was huge waiting lists to get the tape to rent. And it turned out, Elaine had the best line ever. Elaine said, if all the people who said they hated Ishtar had seen it, I would be a rich woman today.
I love that quote. Yeah. That's another great quote you put in the book.
I did. In fact, you've proven to me that you've read that book.
I'll have to look up that documentary. And I know over the years, many people have come to say that they love the film. Scorsese, Tarantino. And to me, I always really liked it. I think the first half, it's almost like a perfect, first half. The first half of the film. The last time I wasn't crazy about the second half, but I'd have to see it again. But the first half is extraordinary.
What was so amazing was how prescient she was. She was able to predict what went on in the Middle East way before it happened. And that was quite interesting. And it's you should watch it again. You really should.
I'll see it again. Yeah, because it's been a while. I've seen it a couple of times, but I should watch it again. But is that part of the reason why she didn't direct again? Was that ordeal just too much?
Well, I don't think she was offered anything she wanted to do. I mean, it's not that she's not offered things, as I said earlier. She is, but Elaine is going to do what Elaine wants to do. Like, as I've said earlier, a true artist. Now, Cassavetes was that way too, but what he would do would make a movie, get a huge fee, and take that fee and make another movie. That's how he would. He called me, I think it's in the book. He called me from, I think it was Rome, saying, I'm making this really bad movie. I'm getting $850,000. I'm taking the money I'm going to make opening night. And that's what he did.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. He would act in films he really didn't care about in order to
make his
fund the films, of course.
That he did care about. Yeah.
Yes. No, that's a good, it's a good system. Another person, of course, you worked for that you represented was a film director I love, Elia Kazan.
Yes.
And I know you also became close with him. You tell that story about throwing his 90th birthday party. I love the story of how you met him. Again, I won't go into the details so we don't spoil it for people who perhaps haven't read it yet. But he had you represent his films, Baby Doll, A Face in the Crowd. What made him give it to you? I mean, what was it? Did you ever ask him, or did you ever think, gee, he really gave me that opportunity, and you were a young guy? I was curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Oh, I had a lot of thoughts on that because he changed my life. Once I had Elia Kazan's movies, must have been somebody. I must know something. Why would this man give them to me? Which he did. And I asked him, I said, what the heck was it? He said, Julian, I spent my whole life casting. That's what I do. He said, I knew you were a guy who was hungry and smart and would want to do something with my movies because Robert, in those days there was no cassettes, there was no
Right.
cable. It was just revival theaters and television. And so I set out to sell a face in the crowd, Baby Doll in America, America.
Oh, that's the other one, America, America. Yeah.
A very interesting movie, no star.
Yeah, it's great. Great movie.
Nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture of the Year, and yet no names in it. Very
Yes.
interesting. Very interesting. He was a great filmmaker. He was a man who believed in me. He also, as we know, sadly named names during the period. So, like all of us, some people stumble more than others. Some people don't, but he was important to me. We even talked about the fact that he had named the names, and he said, "Look, they had those names. I didn't name anyone they didn't know," and I really tentatively, because it was a nerve-wracking time for me to even bring it up.
Right.
But I said, "Yeah, maybe they didn't. Maybe they had the names, but it was who you were, what you represented that was doing it." So. It's he hated the communists, and it's a very complicated thing. The older you get, the more you kind of say, well, Charles Grodin the actor, was a very good friend of mine, and he says, you got to give people some rope. You got to give them some rope. So what the hell? I know
what did he say? What did he say to you when you said, yeah, but when he said they already had the names and what you just
what you represented.
Yeah.
He said,
what did he say then?
I think he said perhaps.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, because he even in his memoir, he never I mean, again, I can
he never apologized.
Yeah, he never really showed much remorse for
for that. But it was he had a close friendship with Arthur Miller for a while, and that fell apart. But then when Arthur wanted a play produced, he went to him afterwards and did After the Fall. So it's a funny thing, all as we've seen in American politics, a lot of strange things are happening with people and with let's say people who you'd never think would be together are banding together, and other people are not talking to each other. It's a sad situation when you're on the planet for such a short time. You got to try to get along. I've always tried to get along with people, but some people just go too far, and that's when I fired them. I guess.
Did anyone ever criticize you or get mad at you for for even working with him? Or
no, that's a very interesting point. No one ever. Wow. I never thought of that. Very good, Robert. I may come back here again. No one ever did. They may have thought it. Or said it behind my back, but no one ever did. They just wanted to know about him. They were interested in how I became his representative at such a young age, and why he gave me the film. And that's part of the book, of course, like you said. And that would take up the whole show if I told that whole story of how I met and stalked him.
It's a great story.
In today's world, I would have been arrested.
Right.
But this was 1966, so we're talking 58 years ago. It's a long time.
My God. Yeah. Well, I mean, aside, of course, from that very dark period, the blacklisting, just him, his talent. I mean, his films are incredible. I mean, I've seen most of them, but there's not a mediocre one in the bunch. They're all so fantastic.
I think that's true. And he's one of the few directors that went on location quickly. Most directors in those period of 40s and stuff stayed in the studio, shot on the lot, and he wanted to go to the location. And he had enough power to do so, and he did, because he won 2 Academy Awards for On the Waterfront and Gentleman's Agreement, and it was an amazing thing that he had. Here he's coming off 54 is On the Waterfront, 55 for Warner Brothers, he makes East of Eden, introducing
Yes.
James Dean to the world. And what was amazing about that was his deal with Jack Warner was he'd make a 3-picture deal. Everybody wanted him at this point. Academy Award and then East of Eden back to back. Whoa. So everybody wanted him. And he made this deal that he'd make 3 pictures for Warner's, and at the end of 10 years, they would revert to him. And he owned them.
Yeah.
Very, very, very unusual. Hitchcock had a deal. Hitchcock had a deal like that in the later films. And Bob Hope did also. But very few. Very few.
Very rare.
There was one film that Kazan really disliked that he made, and that was called Sea of Grass.
Oh, with Spencer Tracy, and I think he writes about that in the memoir. That
I'm sure he does. That's one of the most truthful memoirs I've ever read of anybody in show business.
He wasn't easy on himself, which I appreciate.
Oh no, he really does a job. So
it's a great book.
Yeah, it really is. But no, I think a lot of these people, it was a very interesting time, and I kind of wish I had been part of that time, but I got in at the very end. The time I got in, it was really, television had just knocked the film business on its ear.
Right.
So
I wanted to ask a little bit about the restoration of Othello that Orson Welles' Othello that you did, and I wanted to read something from that Ray Kelly wrote. I found this last night, who runs a fantastic website on Orson Welles, and he wrote, it deserves a round of applause for what it accomplished 25 years ago. He wrote this in 2017, sparking renewed interest in Welles' post-Citizen Kane work and putting one of his overlooked films back in theaters nationwide. Othello was lauded in 1992 by mainstream critics who called the film a masterpiece. And the Castle Hill release brought Othello back to the Cannes Film Festival in May 1992, 40 years after it won the prestigious Palme d'Or there. So that's, high praise to have been part of bringing back the interest in Welles's post-Citizen Kane work, because I think sometimes that's all people think you did, but he did so many films, wonderful films after that. How did that come to be with meeting his daughter Beatrice and the process of the restoration?
Well, it was first of all, a lot of people were involved in that restoration. The only thing that I had to do was that I pretty much financed it and then distributed it. So, and I loved it. Every year there was something called NAPI, National Association of Television Program Executives. NAPI. God forbid that we would not have an abbreviation for something. And we that year was in Los Angeles, and 2 attorneys came in to me and said, would you be interested in distributing an Orson Welles film? And I said, are you kidding? Of course. What is it, Chimes at Midnight? And they said, no. I said, well, what is this? We can't tell you. Oh, okay. So I said, but I am interested. They said, okay. And they left. And I was so excited. I got back to New York, my major office, my main office, and I waited, but no one ever called. And so I figured, well, I guess they went around finding out who was interested, and they made a deal with someone else. And then, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3, I'd forgotten about it. Weeks went by, and I got a call saying that Beatrice Welles was on the phone. And I got on the phone, and I first thought she might be related to Gwen Welles, who had just been, at that point, made in Nashville with Robert Altman. So I didn't put it together. And then she said, I'm Orson Welles. I'm youngest daughter. He had 3 daughters, and she was the youngest. And she said, I'm going to be in New York. Can I meet with you? I said, of course, of course. And so, being a bit of a chauvinist, I guess, I figured a heavy woman with a beard may come in. Anyhow, it comes in as a beautiful, willowy blonde who has been a model. She had been a model, and she told me about the movie, and I said, can I see it? And I saw it, and I thought, oh, my God. 2 things. One, this is a fantastic movie, but it's in
Yeah, it's amazing.
terrible, terrible shape. You know,
Right.
the sound was out of sync. You know, men were speaking with women's voices. I mean, it was really in bad shape.
Right.
And the music, not because of Orson Welles, but because of the time, the late 19, the right, they had shot in Italy after the war. Well, Italy was in a shambles, so the soundtrack was
Yeah.
bad. Soundtrack was bad. It was out of sync, and some folks in Chicago, where the attorneys were, re-recorded the music beautifully, and then I took it over and did the mix. Now, Robert, as you probably know, maybe some of your audience does, when you make a movie, there's generally three major tracks. One is the dialogue, like you and I are talking now. One is the sound effects. If we had some birds or a siren or whatever going by, that's the sound effects. And then there's the music. And you take
Right.
those three tracks, major tracks, and marry them together in the movie. And so I needed to do that because the film was out of sync. And I tried to get the number one mixer in New York, a fellow named Lee Dichter, who did Mike Nichols films, Woody Allen films, Nora Ephron films, Alan Pakula films. He was just the top. He said, Julian, I have no time. I can't do it. I said, no, I don't want you to do it. I just want your advice on what I can do with it. And so now, Lee Dichter is an artist. There are very few, as I said earlier about artists. He's an artist, a great, great mixer. And I showed him the first reel, and he turned to me and said, "You son of a bitch." Because he knew he had to do it. He knew when he saw that extraordinary beginning of that film, he had to be.
Oh, yeah.
And so what he did was he had, okay, I'll work at night and I'll work on weekends because I have no time. And that's what happened. And I thought it was a little tricky of me, but I thought I'd get him. The only way I could get him was to tell him I didn't want him to do it when, of course, I did.
Right. Right. That's another great story in the book.
I think if we keep doing this, they won't have to read the damn book.
Yes, I'm trying to be careful to not, so I don't put pressure on you to repeat many stories. But that was such a great Wells story.
Yeah, well, I'm only interested, Robert, in being consistent. I hope what I said I wrote. You know, who the hell knows?
Yes, it was. Yes, you did. You did indeed. Did you ever meet? Well, I mean, this was after he died, but did you ever meet Wells before? Okay.
What was one of the saddest? You know, you have a couple of things in your life that you say you regret. I don't really regret anything, but there are things that I wish had happened differently. That was a very big discussion with Woody Allen about regret. And back and forth we went, and he said, "Oh, come on, everybody regrets something." And I said, "No, it's not that I didn't make mistakes, but I don't regret it." I'm back and forth, and finally I said, "Woody, je regrette rien," which in French is "I regret nothing," but it was what Edith Piaf used to say. That was her tagline. So I got a little smile out of Woody on that one, not a laugh, but a little one. Anyhow,
right.
I don't know whether we were on something else, but God knows I'm flying all over. So who knows?
No. I mean, I was actually thinking because he would have been a great guest on your show, Wells. Because I mean, I could listen to him talk all day. Yeah, he's so great in interviews, and that was larger than life personality. You know.
Thank you. That was the story I was going to tell. A fellow named Henry Jaglom, who's a writer and director, made a lot.
Oh yeah, Jaglom. Yeah.
Jaglom was a friend of mine, and he arranged for Orson Welles and I to have lunch with him at Ma Maison, you know. And and it turned out that I had to, because I had a 4-hour radio show, it was on from 8 to midnight. I had to fly back for the show, and the only time Welles could do it was that day and that night, and I would be.
Oh no!
So, in retrospect, you know, these are the things you might have done, could have done. I probably should have had my producer put on 4 hours of tape of my old shows, and I could have missed a week. But I had to be careful because I went to Cannes every year, the film festival, and I was gone for 4 weeks. So I had to be careful that I didn't go any more than that. And that was another reason. I couldn't take a fifth week. The station would not have liked it. So,
I see. I see.
so to
Well, that
answer your question, when we both were much younger, the answer is I never met him. No.
it's interesting that you brought up that it was going to be a lunch also with Jaglom, because you may know this, but he turned those conversations with Wells that he had at lunch into a book called Lunches with Orson. It's a little controversial because some people think he didn't tell Orson that he was recording him. I don't know what the story is, but I mean, it's an interesting read. That's for,
Yes,
that's for sure.
That, and I think it is controversial, but everybody has to decide what they're going to do with their lives and what their personal ethics are. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, Kazan actually said to me, as I put in the book, "Are you going to write a book about us?" And I said, and I said, "Well, I'm not really a writer." He said, "Well, we've had some interesting times together." And so I ended up writing some chapters about him in both books, because he was such he and Elaine May were the two most important people in my life vocationally. Because Elaine May said, "Why are you an executive? You're a producer. You're a natural producer, and you can do it." And I said, "I'm afraid.
Right.
I'm afraid. I've always had a paycheck. I'm afraid to go out on my own."
Right.
And she said, "Let's have dinner with Herb Gardner, who wrote 1,000 Clowns, and I'm Not Rappaport, and a lovely man."
Oh, yeah.
And we all had dinner together, and I voiced my concern. And Herb said, "Julian, you open up the store, and we'll help you fill the shelves." So
I love that.
Yeah, and so that's what got me to have the nerve to go and do it.
Well, I'm glad you did, and I'm sure they were as well. And
certainly I'm glad I did it, and because this was not indigenous to Paramount. This would have been any of the studios in those days. The idea of making movies was not high on the list. High on the list was to perpetuate your power. That was high on the list. That was numero uno, as they might say. And I just realized I wasn't really interested in swimming in those waters. It just was not for me. And so I wanted to run a studio. It wasn't that I didn't, but it would have been a different system if I had ever become the head. As I write in the book, what I would have done that would have been different.
Right.
It either would have made me one of the more successful ones or one of the biggest flops in studio history. But I never got the shot. I never got the shot because I had to leave. I had to leave. I really couldn't take it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can understand that if you're more interested in doing good work and everyone's only interested in money, it's like oil and water.
Yes,
they just don't mix.
True. I wouldn't say only interested. Money was very important, but the most important was to perpetuate your power and to go up. As in most corporations, it's not indigenous to the studio system. That's, I'm sure, IBM or DuPont. I mean, that's the way seemingly it works. It shouldn't work that way, but that's the way it seems to work. Yeah.
Right. I love at the end of both books, you give advice on life. And one of the things that I completely agree with you on is that people would always say to you, and this happens to all kids, adults always say, "Oh, enjoy your life now, because when you get older, wait till you get to the real world," quote unquote. And as a kid, I reacted like you. I always thought, I guess it's going to be horrible when I grow up. But I agree. I have found being a grown up way better than I would not want to go back to being a kid. And I understand, like you said, I understand people are talking about bills and responsibilities. But it makes me sometimes wonder, why is that such a common view? And I was curious your opinion on that, because I hear adults say that all the time.
Well, yeah, and I always tell kids when I teach, I go to teach a lot over the country, and I always say to them, this is not the best time of your life. Don't believe them. This is not the best time.
Right.
And I remember thinking, if this is the best time, who wants to get older? Because you're not a man, but you're not a boy anymore. You're in this strange position that your son is going to be in any day now.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not one and not the other, and you're kind of lost, and you're not sure what you want to do, and it's a painful time. Not an easy time for most people.
It's a very hard time. I remember finding it very hard, much harder than getting in your 30s or 40s, or at least for me.
And constantly being told this is the best time of your life. And
I know.
Are you kidding? Check, please. Check. I want the check.
I was relieved to hear us finally have someone else say that. I thought, am I the only one who thinks this? But I was like you. I always, as a kid, I cannot wait to get older. I would think that.
Me too. I wanted out of this area of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I mentioned earlier that I was excited about having people like Bob Hope and George Burns and Jack Nicholson and John Huston and Betty Davis sitting in front of me and talking to them about their career and life. But I think one of the most wonderful stories, I think it's in one of the books, you get to the point that you think, am I Uncle Remus? Am I telling all these tales? But anyhow, those who remember who Uncle Remus is. But George Burns told the story. He was very close to Jack Benny. They were really close friends. And Jack Benny found George Burns to be the funniest guy in the world. And they would often go to the Hillcrest Country Club in L.A. to have lunch. And if George said, "Hey, Jack, pass the salt," Jack would fall over laughing. He just everything was funny. Well, Jack, that day they were going to have lunch, but it was the same morning that Jack Benny was going downtown L.A. to sign the largest television deal in show business history. Gigantic amount of money. And they were going to then have lunch. So in comes Jack, and George is sitting there, and he says, George, you can't believe it. And Jack says, of course, he says, sorry, you can't believe it. And George says, of course, Jack, I know you signed this great deal. No. If you go 30 miles an hour on Wilshire, you'll make every light.
The little things that make one happy or amaze people.
Not the millions making those lights. And of course, as you know, the Dean Martin not being a drunk and Jack Benny not being cheap. This was all their shtick. But Burns was wonderful. Hope was wonderful. I was very happy to have had the pleasure to meet them. And in some cases, not those people, but others I could work with and become their producer. I think the things that I love and always have loved since my father took me to see the Marx Brothers in a night in Casablanca when I was 4 years old was comedy. To me, comedy was everything. And to be able to have produced for Mike Nichols and Elaine May and Woody Allen and Larry Gelbart and work with Neil Simon, with all these people, I think that is a joy that I had. And it was incredible to not only meet them and worship them from afar, and then end up getting to know them and then being their producer. Oh, and Sid Caesar as well. So it's been fun. Been fun.
Well, it's and it's now incredible and fortunate for us to hear all about it in your two great books, of course. Now, if people want to get them, where's the best place for them to get a copy?
Well, I guess it's called Amazon for a reason.
Right.
They seem to have everything.
Yeah, that's the go-to.
Yeah, they're on Kindle, they're on paperback, and hardcover, and in an audiobook. And the audiobook, as you mentioned, is available on both books. Yeah, but I was very happy to work with a company called Audivita, Audivita, who were great to work with on both my books and on my podcast. So it's been a lovely combination of working with them. And but I must say, Robert, that I think the idea that you're able to go in, as I said earlier, into depth about movies, I hope really continues to keep you interested, because it really helps a lot of people, like Bill Goldman's books, Adventures in the Screen Trade, or the wonderful book about What Lie Have You Told Me Now? I mean, he's written and The Season. About theater. He's not only written about
Right.
movies but theater, and Bill Goldman was quite a guy. I knew him pretty well. Boy, I sound like the biggest name dropper in New York, but I don't mean to be.
No.
I did know him. What can I say? I'm apologizing. But those books are, like your show, those books are very informative and entertaining, and that's not an easy thing to do. When you can be both
Right.
informative but still entertain, then you've kind of hit the bullseye, and you've been able to do that. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. I'm touched. There's such kind comments, of course, coming from someone I've known who you are for such a long time. So, and now admire your work. So thank you. And of course, your show is fantastic as well. And I listened to a number of episodes, but the movie talk is, you can get it on YouTube, and there's an audio podcast. I imagine that's pretty much available on any.
I learned about Apple and Spotify and Pandora and iHeart and Audible and In Your Ear and On Your Head and whatever it might be. Yeah, I'm supposed to say wherever you get your podcast.
That's the best. That's the best way to put it. Yeah,
I guess. Hey, you have anything else that you want to talk about? Because I'm ready to spill the beans.
Well, that's it for now, but we'll have to, like your part 2, we'll have to do a part 2 another time. So
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Let me know. You have my email. Let me know. We'll come back.
For sure.
It would be a pleasure.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for your time. And I will leave all the links in the description box below for where people can follow Julian on follow his podcast, or subscribe to his YouTube channel, and get his books, because they're fantastic. So Julian, thanks again. And we'll have you back sometime down the road for sure.
Thank you, Robert, and good luck, and best to your family.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies, for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner. To your top left, in just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching, and thank you again, and I will see you in the next episode.